looking like breeze.
Hello, and welcome to the Anexinet Infrastructure Modernization Podcast. Here on AIM, we invite industry professionals and subject matter experts on to discuss current trends and technology topics. Today, we will be talking about modern network security with alert logic. With me, as always, is Dave Mahoney. Dave, how you doing today?
Just wonderful, Chris. Thank you.
And our guest, and I apologize if I make this out incorrectly, Bharath Vasudevan, Product Marketing VP from Alert Logic.
Thanks for having me.
Bharath, do you want to give everybody the quick overview of who you are and what you do?
Bharath Vasudevan, though, so you almost got it right, but I wasn't going to correct you, but then you gave me the mic, so.
What's sad is that I practiced 3 times and I still...
So I run product and technical marketing at Alert Logic. I've been in the industry probably 20 plus years, most of it spent in infrastructure and cybersecurity, probably the last 5 or 6. It's been a fun ride. It's interesting when you're talking to CIOs and CISOs, there isn't a ton of difference in what's important to them. It's just the subject matter is a little bit different. So it's always an interesting conversation, especially when you end up having to bridge these two, where a lot of times CISOs report to CIOs or sit alongside them. Having an understanding of both is it's a pretty interesting opportunity.
The topic of this discussion is modern network security. Is there something, as you've seen your career go forward, what are the things that make you think the word modern applies?
Well, I remember, I'm probably dating myself just a little bit, but I remember when you got to leave the office, you were done working for the day. That was kind of cool.
Those were nice days, weren't they?
You do remember that? I don't remember that.
I remember the big deal is getting the slide-in card that went on your laptop that would allow you to walk around with it. So, I think that modern just means adaptable for the day. A lot of the concepts were there, but your exposure wasn't as much pre-pandemic. Everybody was working from home, but they weren't exclusively working from home. The nature of when you were connected was different. So, I think in some ways modern is how do I deal with things today, whatever that means.
One of the concepts I think that has been historically accurate is the idea of defense in depth. What do you think that looks like in the modern era?
Well, you don't have to go back too far. Most organizations were just worried about prevention, and they really believed if I've got all my prevention tools in place, I'm good to go. And here's a big difference between, IT infrastructure and security is who's your adversary. For IT, for the longest time, you're competing against a handful of vendors, and then all of a sudden the cloud guys show up and force innovation. I think cybersecurity has had that challenge the entire time where the adversaries are always trying to get better than the incumbent. So, you roll back 5 years, everyone was worried about prevention and it was all on-prem, the whole wall perimeter thing. But when the perimeter went away, when everyone started moving to the cloud, now it's, I need a new prevention tool for this. Oh, everything's moving to SaaS. Oh, need a prevention tool for that. And, you get CASB, you get web proxies, you get all of these different tools that are all intended to, prevent the bad guys from getting in. I think what's changed over time is as you increase all the different threat vectors, all the policies are going to create gaps. So what happens when you have all these gaps? And you were asking about defense in depth. Well, this is where you have to start worrying about things like broader and more comprehensive detection that's going to serve as a backstop to all your preventative tools.
I think that's a great point. People have an understanding of the data center is these are my 4 walls and all my computers are inside of those 4 walls. When you build out an infrastructure in the cloud, it becomes so much more expansive. And if you don't have that kind of monitoring, you might be exposing yourself to even more risk.
And I think a very common misconception is if it's in the cloud, it's the cloud provider's problem. And I think that couldn't be further from the truth. I think Amazon and AWS do a really nice way of describing it. It's AWS of customer in. So, and that's the reality that not a lot of people get.
Yeah, that shared responsibility model is something that we hear a lot about from our customers. And, how do you outline it and define it? And then how do you make that match and merge with your existing cybersecurity program? Here's the thing that gets me, and we touched on this a little bit. The concept of defense in depth has been around for a long time, right? I mean, I don't even really know how long that term has been in the wild, but it's been out there for a long time. And cybersecurity frameworks have been out there for a long time. And the very threat-rich environment, right? The attack-rich environment has been out there for a while, and it's just gotten worse with COVID, right? There's tons of articles out there about the various percentages that people have measured that cyber attacks have increased over the past year because everybody's online. But I'm going to pick on somebody that's been in the news recently, and not to be negative or detrimental to them at all, but to make a point that I would like us to talk about, and that's SolarWinds. As we all know, SolarWinds ended up in a situation where they had some compromised DLLs that made it into their software, and then through an update for SolarWinds Orion, got pushed out to various customers, very large customers, global corporations, federal government agencies here in the United States, including the IRS, and caused a lot of problems. And it brings up an interesting problem in almost kind of an ironic way. Right? We all know about defense in depth. We all know about various strategies that are out there and the tools that you mentioned. You'll have this death by tool that they come up with. So if we're supposed to be focused on preventing attackers from getting in, that's one thing. But what about the data coming back out? This whole malware with SolarWinds was all about they were able to establish command and control through their bad acting DLLs that they implanted in the Orion code or in the Orion system, but then establish command and control. And then they were able to create that backdoor and do things that they wanted to be able to do, view data and other things like that. So why aren't people thinking about, hey, well, maybe I should pay more attention to information leaving my network and quantifying and identifying those things? What do you think about that?
Well, I think that, if you look at general cybersecurity maturity, right, your first tier is keeping the bad guys out. And then, depending on which approach you take, the second tier of that could be keeping the good stuff in. And I've seen a lot of organizations try to implement tools like DLP to be able to do that. But that has its own baggage that comes with it. It's not always easy. The other thing you talked about that I think is super important is a lot of times job one is preventing a breach. But I think job two that people don't talk about enough is minimizing the damage in the event of a breach. And this is really, to the SolarWinds example, and even the Hafnium example after that, it's really minimizing the dwell time, right? If you know something is there and you're not looking, or your tools are in audit only mode, not blocking, you can miss a lot of things and it just shows up in the logs. But unless you're looking at it, you're parsing it, you're analyzing it, prioritizing it, and knowing what to do with it, it's not just as simple as catching it. It's catching it, knowing what you've got in the net and knowing what to do with it.
That's a really good point, right? So you collect data, or you need to be collecting data, right? That's the watching part. And then correlating that data together to make some kind of an intelligent decision is the next step. I mean, I would make the argument that that's probably the hardest part about, monitoring a network or incident response, right? Is that let's detect that we've got something going on and then making some intelligent decisions after the fact.
Let me ask you this. How many customers do you know love their SIM implementation?
I don't.
Be honest.
Very many of them have been like, oh yeah, it's just, I think the ones that come to us usually are saying that, hey, we're looking for something else.
And I'll tell you the way we end up with a handful of our customers are people that tried SIM, didn't like it, went to something open source, and that failed even worse. Then they came and said, hey, there's got to be a better way. And it really is that, right? It's the aggregation function is typically not something someone needs help with. It's the next 3 steps beyond that.
It's the difference between collecting the information and making something actionable out of the information.
That's right. What do I do with this?
Right.
Go to the largest of enterprises, right? And even these are people that did have big DLP implementations. They are so scared of disrupting productivity in their employee base. They put all the agents there, but everything's sitting in audit only mode. So in the event of a data leak or a breach or a data and exfil event, the forensics guys can go back and figure out exactly how it happened, which again doesn't really help prevent the breach, but it can give you the smoking gun if you know what you're looking for.
Everybody talks about the CIA triad, right? The confidentiality, integrity, and availability. I did actually have a customer ask me recently, like, hey, do you think that my IT ops guys are suitable enough, if they have the bandwidth, to provide SOC services to my organization. And I said, it's not that they're not suitable, meaning that they couldn't do it. It's that I don't recommend it because ops people are usually very focused on keeping the lights on, which equates directly to availability. And they're focused on availability, and they're not as focused on the confidentiality and then the data integrity. And therefore, you need to have somebody who's going to fill a SOC or a security analyst role, because they're focused on all three, right? I need my systems and my data to be available so that people can do their job and we can make money as a company. Absolutely. But if you can't do that with a level of confidentiality and data integrity, what good is an available system in this day and age? That was my answer. What do you think about that?
I can challenge it in yet another way. What good is a 9x5 SOC?
Yeah.
That's where my head went when you said that. Can my ops guys do this? I'm like, oh, who's going to come in second shift and third shift? And then you get what?
That's a really good point.
It turns out that computers don't sleep.
Well,
there's a sleep button. What are you talking about?
And not everyone's in the same time zone.
Details.
Wait, you mean everybody doesn't run on Eastern Standard Time?
Well, I mean, people in the East Coast do, but I'm pretty sure the bad guys in nation states that aren't named the United States can, operate on their first shift.
Say it's not so.
Dave makes a really good point about the CIA triad, is that availability is the easiest thing to put percentages around. If your information is available, if your web page is up, everybody's happy. But the confidentiality is a harder thing to prove. And this comes back to what we were talking about at the very beginning. Like, in terms of modern security, protecting your data is just as important as making sure that it's available to the right people. In terms of that, from an education perspective, do you think that there's ways that we can talk about this more openly or more differently, that people might understand how important it is?
I've had this conversation about confidentiality a few times, and a lot of times that discussion ends up with privileged users versus standard users. If you're an executive in the company, are you foregoing some of your confidentiality rights because of your stature, or the fact that you're a bigger target to many of the bad guys? You're the whale that people are searching for. So that plays as well. The idea of obfuscation even shows up with some of the SOC analysts. How can I make it such that you're seeing the actions, but you're not seeing the person? And a lot of these are complications that make this challenge a lot harder.
Let's talk more specifically about the Alert Logic product and how it would help customers with these types of questions.
Well, I think the first part is, and this is the really cool part, is it's not a product, right? It's a service. With the MDR, I think you're talking about like 51-49 product and service and product. But at the end of the day, the fact that it's a managed service, it's 24/7. So that comment earlier about second and third shift, well, we're your second and third shift. We're the backstop, right? We're doing the advanced detection that you can't do yourself. I mean, we have so many of these customers. They're like, look, even if you called me at 2 p.m. with an emergency, there is no guarantee I can get to it until 5 when I'm done with all my meetings. So, if this is the nature of what you're dealing with, you got to be there for them 24/7. And that's where the fact that, yes, if you have the appetite to digest all of the security information we're giving you, we've got a pretty powerful platform you can use. But for every organization that can do that, there's 3 or 4 that can't. And they're really after the outcome of, getting that peace of mind that someone's got their hand on the steering wheel, even if they can't.
That is definitely something that is important for any company, is that computers don't sleep. I made that joke earlier, but that's the reality of the situation. So when it comes to some of these more modern types of security, like, what do you think companies should be looking at in terms of future-proofing their own businesses?
Well, I think part of it is balancing your spend on pre-breach environments and post-breach environments, balancing your spend on prevention and detection and response. Budgets aren't growing overnight, but the allocation of the budget that you have, if spread intelligently, you can probably get a much better handle on what is acceptable risk and what's good for your organization if you more holistically approach it.
Can you expand on that a little bit?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's certain security programs and tools that are in place, but a lot of times people look at post-breach environments or coverage for that as insurance, right? It's, why am I paying for advanced detection if I paid for all these prevention tools? And I think the first thing you need to acknowledge as a, security professional, and I'm going to say something, and you're all as security professionals just going to nod your head like, yeah. No amount of investment in protection and preventative tools will prevent a breach 100% of the time. It's a pretty simple statement. You're not going to argue with that. Well, then how do you reconcile that with security budgets where 100% of the budget is going against preventative tools? Now, you're never going to be able to walk away from your firewalls, your AV/EDR, your web proxy, your email security. But if that chews up 100% of your budget, then you just have to acknowledge that there is a business risk present that if you were to get breached, you don't know what that dwell time is going to be.
Right. And that's where I think the monitoring is so important, is at least you're keeping an eye on things.
Well, yeah, somebody is, right? And whether you're doing it yourself, I don't mean to open another can of worms here, but the whole XDR, thing that's sweeping the industry right now. I mean, at the end of the day, that's another tool. And if you're security sophisticated enough, you've got the staffing, you've got everything you need to digest that and make sense of it. Hey, this could be a really cool thing for you. But if you're like the majority of mid-market customers, maybe that's overkill. Maybe that's just like the SIM. It's another tool that's there, but you don't have the expertise to take advantage of what's there for you, which is, where you land back in, why do I need a managed approach? Why do I need a partner to help me through this process?
We touched on a lot of different things. So we've talked about, in general, right, defense in depth strategies need to be applied to modern networks to provide security. We talked a little bit about how, defense in depth in terms of preventative breach measures, right, isn't enough. You also need to prevent exfiltration, and you need to keep things, fine. Even if they get in, if they can't take anything or change anything, okay, you got in, right? I'm still okay. But then we also, we brought up like the SolarWinds example where, they got in and they were actually able to establish command and control and take different actions because they were able to, have this long dwell time and then able to communicate back and forth in the system and actually view data. They were able to find other vulnerabilities once they were in there because they were able to have this open line of communication. And then we've talked about tools and DLP. And for those of you out there that don't know, right, data loss prevention or data leak prevention. And there's various tools you can do that on the network or end users. And then we just brought up this, this XDR concept, which is extended. I believe it's extended detection and response. Is that right?
I don't believe the X has fully been defined.
Okay. Something. So anyway, it's some sort of X quotations detection and response. I don't think that there's no right answer for every business because every business is different. I think we all agree on that, right?
Yeah, but I think thematically, I mean, can I give you an example, if you don't mind, like a Hafnium example. So, we talk about not being able to prevent a breach. Well, when something like this happens, it's effectively a 0 day, right? You don't know what's going on. There was an exploit that was, actively being exploited. And actually, Alert Logic found that type of activity happening in late February. So a few days before there was any public disclosure. At the time, obviously, we didn't know what it was, but we saw the pivot being executed post-breach where we saw lateral movement and communication back with a known command and control server, which immediately raised all of our flags like, hey, there's something going on here. So we notified the customer. There was actually 3 or 4 of our customers still running on-prem Exchange. And I think when we did the whole tally, there was around 100 customers still running on-prem Exchange. But we found 3 or 4 actively happening before anything was known. So all we knew is we saw weird stuff happening, raised the flag, saw what it was. Hey, you've been breached. We're not sure how yet, but this is command and control traffic. This is classic breach behavior or post-breach behavior. So, 3 days later, the public disclosure happened. And then we rapidly pieced everything together and said, well, this must be the common thread. and then went and notified everybody else who hadn't been popped yet, but were exposed because based on our scanning data, we knew what was going on in their environment. It's sort of a community defense where we've seen it actively being exploited. We know, hey, the 97 others of you have that same, call it a petri dish that's ready to grow.
Right.
We want to let you know, and we know there's a patch out there, so guys, go do it, which then gets into all the patching hygiene challenges that organizations have. But it's something where we didn't stop the breach. We couldn't stop the breach, but we contained it before any exfil occurred, any damage occurred, any ransomware was deployed.
Right. So we've talked about this a little bit today, right? Death by tool, right? Where people just buy all these preventative measures. In your mind or in your experience, obviously there's a whole series of frameworks and risk analyses that can be done to come up with financial models to say, hey, you never want to spend more protecting the data than the data is actually worth to your business, right? That's a financial risk analysis. When Alert Logic goes to market, what do you think that your biggest value is to customers? I mean, SOC and SIEM is notoriously an expensive thing, right? And SOC as a service, everybody thinks, well, as a service means there's something in the cloud, right? So is it really going to be better for my business in the long term? Am I really going to get the ROI and the time to value? Could you talk to us a little bit just about how you guys are attacking the market and what you're excited about in terms of the service? Because I know we love your service, otherwise we wouldn't have partnered with you, and I think it's a fantastic partnership, and I tout it all the time as the cybersecurity guy. But I'd like to hear it from your own your own brain and your own mind. Like what gets you excited about your service?
So there's two things. One is Alert Logic made the bet on the cloud a long time ago. So, we're not in our version 1.0 of protecting assets in the cloud or performing advanced detection for. The really cool part is right now, as customers are making that migration to the cloud, and whether we're talking about lift and shift and leveraging the cloud for IaaS, or if it's further down their cloud transformation where now they're starting to refactor applications, start taking advantage of microservices, or if you're all in on the cloud and it's, we're DevOps forward, we're putting the right workload in the right cloud platform, wherever you are on that journey, and, I just named off 3 phases that you could be on, Alert Logic can solve all of that from a single pane of glass perspective. You get visibility into your vulnerabilities, your exposures, your incidents with a clean user experience that shows here's your Azure environment, here's your AWS environment, here's your on-prem environment. And we're not talking about 3 different tools. We're not talking about a tool for vulnerabilities and a tool for incidents. If I look across the vendor landscape, you sometimes get that. So-and-so acquired so-and-so, rebranded their service. Now it's still transacted like 2 companies. And you go to this console to look at vulnerabilities, you go to this console to look at incidents. I don't have to name the company, but they're out there. It's one pane of glass for us. And that is huge for security strapped organizations that can't train up individuals on 10 different tools. And mind you, this whole tool concept is a backstop because ultimately the outcome we're delivering them is the service. So it's really cool if you look at it from that perspective. And then this breadth of detection, right? We're not the EDR guy that's saying, hey, everything comes to the endpoint, go with us. Or, hey, man, I know that's limited. I'm going to go add another source of telemetry and voila, I'm XDR. That still doesn't help you because they're both tools. What we're talking about here is looking from multiple sources everywhere our customers operate. Azure, AWS, on-prem. We're pulling in telemetry from the network. We're working with other AV and endpoint vendors to pull in their telemetry, extracting incidents, performing correlations, really providing that backstop between all the different stovepipes of prevention tools to provide true comprehensive detection. And we do it in a manner where if we do find something that we deem to be a higher critical issue, you've got a 15-minute SLA. So we are doing our darndest to minimize your dwell time, which again is where all the dirty stuff can start happening the longer the bad guys are sitting in your environment.
And for those of you out there that don't know, dwell time is the amount of time the bad guys are sitting in your environment, just so we're all on the same page. So that's tremendous, right? I mean, you don't have to hire SOC and security analysts on a 24/7 rotation, because like you said, my computer says it sleeps, Chris. That's what it says.
The ones in your company that generate revenue don't.
Fair enough. Okay. So I don't have to, hire a SOC and security analysts and buy phones and computers, right? I mean, huge savings there, right? I don't have to buy perpetual based licensing for a SIM tool, right? And then do all these, connections with my various telemetry sources, things that feed it data so that it can actually get, alerts and logs and other things like that from various sources, whether they be endpoints, servers, workstations, firewalls, yada, yada, yada. And then I also don't have to build any intelligence into that SIM tool that I buy that doesn't come out of the box, right? Like there are SIM tools out there that you buy them and yeah, it'll aggregate all the data, but outside of Active Directory logs, did this person try to log in 1,000 times? Oh, that's an alert. Somebody's trying to brute force me. You really have to build some of this intelligence in.
Yeah, the analytics.
Yeah, there's one in particular that I'm thinking of that isn't supposed to be a SIM, but it's sold as one. I'm sure we all know what it is, but we won't talk about it.
One thing you sort of glossed over, that your junior SOC analysts no longer command a junior salary.
Sure. Yeah. Cybersecurity is such a hot field and such a hot target. The cost to employ those people and maintain the certifications that they hold, they're in demand. And we all know, right? Demand makes costs go up.
I've heard stories of SOC analysts switching companies because the new company offered pet insurance.
Yeah, when you start evaluating your employer based on pet insurance, I think you're doing okay for yourself.
Yes, sir.
One question that I would have, I feel like there are certain companies that think that they're too small. They don't need these kinds of security things. When you look at the environment, a small company, a medium company, a large company, do you think that there's a massive difference in terms of the security needs?
I can tell you one I deal with on the regular basis is, what does a small company need to do to make more money? They need to work with the bigger company. And this is a supply chain issue. A lot of big companies aren't going to do business with small companies unless they can demonstrate security hygiene, if they can demonstrate compliance, if they can demonstrate things like change control for critical files. I spoke with an enterprise CISO in a previous life, and he told me nation states, and this is a large defense contractor, nation states don't come to me anymore. They try to get in through my supply chain so they get a free pass in. And, that trickles down all the way. If you want to do business with a large apparel house and you're a supplier to them, maybe you just make buttons. You're not making a lot of money. But in order for you to do business with them, you're going to have to demonstrate some security hygiene. So we see it all the time where smaller companies that want to do business with bigger companies need to start demonstrating some security hygiene or they don't get in.
Yeah, vendor and supply chain management has definitely been on an uptick in terms of at least conversations that I've had over the past year or so, right? Because of that exact reason. We can't link up systems or do things programmatically with people unless they demonstrate, some level of, like you said, security, program maturity, or hygiene, and they're taking some level of acceptable care and stewardship of their data that we approve, our senior management approves of. That's a real thing, and I have those conversations more and more every day. Whether that's companies that need to beef up their cybersecurity because they need a little bit higher level maturity, or companies that say, hey, I need some advice on vendor management. What is the minimum set of requirements that I should be putting into my vendor management program to communicate with people? Happens more and more.
I'll tell you also from a startup perspective, where we see this coming around is after startups get their Series A. So during their seed round, it's all about ideation. Once they get their Series A, now their investors are starting to ask them questions like, hey, how are you protecting this IP? How are you going to remain compliant if you're now starting to take orders and you're dealing with credit cards? How are you demonstrating PCI compliance? So a lot of this stuff happens as companies start growing. And in many cases, if you're a hotshot company and you're getting your Series A and you're riding the rocket ship, the last thing anybody wants to do is sit back and talk about cybersecurity.
It's a really good point. I think people overlook the intellectual property part sometimes, especially in startups. We're in an age where I don't even know all the numbers off the top of my head. I read some statistics where, we've got more overnight millionaires in the past, 10 years than I think the last some ridiculous amount of time in history, right? We're minting millionaires like crazy because we're in this digital startup age. But I wonder how many of those people actually took the time to think about, what happens if my idea gets stolen and then I can't take my business to market anymore because some larger competitor, gets a hold of it and, patents it or copyrights it or trademarks it. And now instead of having the opportunity of a lifetime, I've got nothing because I just didn't bother to use, common sense security.
Or worse still, it gets ransomwared and now you don't have the money to pay the ransom.
Yeah.
Or you're taking your seed money or your Series A and paying off cyber criminals to get your IP back.
Mm-hmm. And they're all asking for Bitcoin, and the cost of Bitcoin is going through the roof. What are we at, 54,000 per coin or something?
I think that is an important point. That is that security needs to be baked into whatever a company is doing from the beginning, because ordinarily people think of security as an impediment, and it just has to be table stakes.
Well, it should never be an impediment. That's the common misconception. Security is never meant to be an impediment. That's the whole point of the CIA triad that we talked about earlier, right? If the data and systems aren't available to the people that need to use them to make money, cybersecurity's failed.
Yeah.
That's not security. That's just bad business.
Yeah, you got to be the Department of Acceleration, not the Department of No.
Exactly. It's, hey, I want you guys to be able to do this, but we gotta put the rails around it and do it smart. I want us to hit our MBOs. I want us to make more money. I'm a company guy, right? That's the message.
Well, I want you to accelerate your cloud adoption because that makes us all nimbler, but we have to do it in a smart way.
Yeah. Somewhere along the lines, that message got lost. I don't know how that happened exactly, but
honestly, I blame certificates.
Oh boy, here we go. I just want everybody to know I am a huge PKI person. I love it. Less passwords, the better.
Well, and you know what? It's funny because a lot of times with MDM and things like that, they try to prevent customization of endpoint devices. And, biometrics sometimes gets thrown out the door when that happens. Just frightening because it is one of the safest ways to log in and out of things.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Chris.
No, it's true, actually. When Apple went to Face ID, people made fun of them, but it turns out that the biometrics are actually more secure than the fingerprint.
Well, which is also more secure than capital letter, word, number, shift, number.
Yeah. Actually, the cops apparently love it. I had a police officer that went to the gym I used to go to. He told me that he arrested a guy one time. So he was, being very uncooperative, and they had him handcuffed. And they needed to get some information off of his phone to contact somebody to help the gentleman with whatever the problem was going on. And he wouldn't unlock his phone or give him his passcode. So he just said, So he pushed the home button and held it up in front of his face, and his phone opened. And he was like, thanks a lot.
I don't think that's something that Alert Logic can help us with, but
not so much. But we can still provide best practice guidance on what not to do.
Rule number 1, always be nice to the police.
Or, don't be like Kanye and have 0000000 password.
All right. So we're coming up to the end of our time here. Are there any topics or any questions that you wish that we had asked you that we have not?
I think we bounced around sufficiently. We covered some ground. We keep getting back to talking about different tools, and I think if the billions upon billions of dollars spent on cybersecurity tools are any indication, it's probably not the exclusive correct answer moving forward. Mm-hmm. I can't imagine anybody feels safer today than they did yesterday. So, part of it is spreading that load around, making sure that it's not all on you. The burden's not all on you. There's so much to be gained by looking at another approach. It's just the opportunity that's in front of us. And I don't know that it's, large organizations this, small organizations this. It's really look at what you're capable of doing and look at where you want to go and just be creative in finding ways to get there.
Well, I think you're right. And I think the other thing is there's some of that $18 billion worth of cost of goods and recognized revenue and cybersecurity has a lot to do with the fact that people aren't really taking the time to analyze their environments, right? Actually doing a threat analysis on their important mission critical applications. Cybersecurity has gotten pigeonholed into becoming an IT function, and that's not where it starts, right? Anybody that's taken a security course or an advanced security course knows that if you don't have policy and governance that's driven by senior management, right, of the business stakeholders, they are the data owners. That's where cybersecurity needs to start.
Yeah, I mean, I think a common trend you're seeing now is that most boards of directors, they're forcing somebody to be cyber aware now. It's almost a requirement to get in. At least one member on the board needs to understand what they're talking about. And that's really then the top cover at a board level for the CIO or the CISO to start moving an agenda forward. So it is very much starting at the top.
Absolutely. And where I was headed with that is if people were addressing cybersecurity correctly from the start, right, it needs to be a business requirement. It needs to be table stakes, to use Chris's term, that's set by senior management, the people that actually own the systems and the data that belong to your company, okay? And then used to solve specific risks and requirements to your business. So I guarantee you there's a ton of people out there that have absolutely no sensitive data in their email. It's just a collaboration tool for them. I mean, and don't get me wrong, these are smaller companies. Let's be
sure.
But I guarantee you their email is simply a collaboration tool. Their SharePoint is simply a collaboration tool. Their Teams, Microsoft Teams or other chat, unified communication tools are just collaboration tools. There's no sensitive data in there. So why are they spending all this time and effort on things that protect that information to the highest levels? Go focus on the system that actually generates revenue for you. And I know that sounds like a very oversimplified statement, but I think it's a reality. People are not classifying their systems based on risk and reality. And so they overspend.
So funny you say that. We've got an automated response beta program going on right now. And, we have a couple of customers that are looking at their risk profile, and they're looking at things like, if there's an incident that's come through that says my VPN is originating an attack, chances are that's a false positive. So we're going to go ahead and lower the severity and close it. But that's something that would have required investigation prior. So it's to your point, right? It's, what? I'm pretty sure that that's not going to be a thing. And it's an allowable business risk because that just seems preposterous. So we're going to go ahead and ignore that one. But it's just like that. It's using a smarter lens to look at the problem and applying your resources where you have the biggest risk and exposure.
Ding, 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 ding. You get the grand prize.
Thank you.
I guess.
I think that was the global you.
Y'all. That's y'all. I'm in Texas. That's y'all.
Bharath, thank you very much for your time.
No, you bet.
Dave, good work.
Likewise. Talk to you guys later. Bharath, nice to meet you. Good talk, dude.
See you guys.
Bye.